Welcome to Inside Their Lives, where we seek to go beyond the surface and tell the whole story. Please check out our sponsor, Aubel.co, for luxury baby baskets and newborn gift sets. The Jersey Shore, with its pristine beaches, scenic ocean views, recreational activities, and iconic boardwalks, have attracted visitors for decades. It's a huge attraction for families and tourists seeking both relaxation and excitement. Who could have imagined that beneath this serene beauty lay such a lurid past? It was a cool November morning. The trees, with their leaves trying to hold on to the last remnants of summer, would have made a stunning backdrop for a photo shoot. No one would be expecting to buck up on a dead body, especially that of a child. But that is exactly what happened. The lifeless body, Marie Smith, was found. The scene was one of utter brutality. Her small frame bore the unmistakable marks of a violent assault, the cruelty of which sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned officers. In the seemingly idyllic seaside town of Asbury Park, such horrors were unimaginable. It shattered the illusion of safety that had cloaked the town for the couple of decades since it was created. At the turn of the century, Asbury Park had been known as the jewel of the North to some, a glittering haven for the elites of New York and Philadelphia. Elegant carriages rolled along the pristine boardwalk where the laughter of upper middle-class families mingled with the soothing whispers of the ocean. It was a place where society's finest came to frolic in the ocean, enjoy each other's company, never-ending parties, lunches, and other get-togethers, and most importantly, escape the fast pace of the city. There were those who moved to Atlantic City for better opportunities for their families. They did not mingle much with the upper class, as they had to eke out a living on farms, factories, and working other blue-collar jobs. But as whispers of Marie's fate began to spread like wildfire, the town's illusion of safety and innocence began to crumble, revealing that there were those with sinister motives amongst them. Marie and her family moved from Brooklyn to New York in 1910. Brooklyn in 1910 was an industrial city. Many people lived in tenement yards, and the city was filled with the sounds of machinery, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, and the constant hum of a growing population. Asbury Park, on the other hand, was more serene, with open wooded spaces, fresh air, and more recreational activities. In September, Marie began attending the Bradley School, which was 10 blocks from her house. She was small for her age, fair-haired, and blue-eyed. She was described as responsible and reliable, quiet and a little bit shy, so she was trusted to walk to school and back with her little brother. In a small town where there was likely to be 1 to 2 grocery stores, a gas station, a bakery, a florist, most people knew each other and felt safe. Doors were probably left unlocked, and neighbors looked out for each other, so children were trusted to be more responsible and independent. Marie and Thomas leave home at around 8 and walk 10 blocks to her school each morning. On the day in question, she was supposed to leave school during her recess break and bring lunch to her father, Peter, who worked at a rendering plant. His job was to drive around to butchers and collect all the unwanted animal plants. It seems her mother was expecting another child and was not feeling up to the task. She had walked to school and back for the last 2 months without an issue. So when she didn't come home that day, her mom, Nora, wasn't initially worried. There are stories that Nora relied a lot on Marie, including often trusting her to go and buy her alcohol in some questionable parts of town. But at around 3 o'clock, she began to become anxious and went to the school hoping that Marie would be found. She questioned her teacher and her friends. They all agreed that Marie didn't appear to be sick and she had left school at 10:30 but had never returned. After staying at the school all day, waiting for Marie to come, Nora finally gave up and left. She became anxious and frightened and stopped at Peter's job to let him know what was going on. He then started walking door to door and asking people if they had seen Marie, all to no avail. No one had seen little Marie. So later on that evening, Peter and Nora, along with the school principal, began walking the neighborhood. They walked in the woods, they walked to houses, they looked everywhere for Marie, but no sign of her was ever found. They launched a manhunt which involved family, friends, neighbors, and even the National Guard. However, they came up empty. Woods, barns, homes were searched. The lake was searched and the water was drained in order to locate Marie, but nothing. Nora wondered to herself, had Marie done something to get herself killed like their firstborn Johnny, who had drank horse liniment and died? The dad wondered if somehow a car had run over her, or if gypsies had taken her. 3 days later, her body was found by William Benson. It appeared that she had been assaulted sexually and one side of her head was caved in. Benson ran all the way to Marie's house to let her father know that he had found Marie. William Benson was a former partner of the local florist, Max Krushka. Coincidentally, her body was found in the woods close to the floral shop owned by Max Krushka. Marie usually walked through a wooded area and past residences where 6 men lived. It was thought that based on the assault of the body, the fact that part of her head had been struck, as if bashed by a hammer, a man had committed the crime. So which man killed Marie? Was it Benson who discovered the body, even though the area where she was found had been searched extensively? Was it Max Krushka who owned the nursery? He was reportedly in New York that day, but had given one of the secretaries at the store some flowers. Was it a way to ensure that she remembered him and shore up his alibi? Was it a German by the name of Frank Heidman who worked on the nursery? Was it her dad, whom she was charged with taking lunch to? Could he have intercepted her at home and killed her? No one knew who killed Marie. After hearing about the murder from a neighbor, local reporter Alvin Cliver thought he knew just who it was. It had to be Tom Williams, otherwise known as Black Diamond, a former prize fighter turned handyman. 40-year-old Tom had come to Asbury Park from Virginia 14 months ago and did odd jobs to earn money. He was 6 feet tall, dark-skinned, with broad shoulders. He was known to love his liquor, particularly gin and whiskey. Tom had done work for the family, namely Marie's aunt, Delia Jackson, who was married to an African-American man. It seems Tom was the only other Black man around the family. According to Peter, Marie's dad, he had a quarrel with Tom because he found out that he had been bringing beer to his wife. Peter said that he threatened to have William arrested if he continued to do this. But that was the only argument that the two ever had. He also noted that he did not suspect Tom of committing the murder, and in fact, Tom had helped him search for Marie's body. Tom had a few strikes against him, the most important of which was his skin color. African Americans in Asbury Park were not very common. There were Black hotel and restaurant workers, but most of them lived across the railroad tracks. You see, Asbury Park was not built for Black people. It was built for genteel white folks to enjoy. In 1885, when people began complaining that Blacks were vacationing in Asbury Park and using the beaches, the developer of the town, James Bradley, designated a Black beach. According to some reports, this area of the beach was next to sewer pipes which spewed human waste into the ocean. He also put some other measures in place, including restricting the times that Blacks were able to use the beach from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning. African Americans protested, but this did not do much to end the racial tensions that were rife. Many of these same Black people were trying to escape the Jim Crow South, not knowing there was also the Jim Crow North. Tom had served a sentence for larceny and another for public drunkenness. Finally, he was a known associate of the Smiths. By all accounts, Thomas Williams was already guilty. So while sleeping on a sofa in a rented boarding room, Tom was suddenly awoken by the police. The boarding house was searched, and he was subsequently arrested for the murder of Marie Smith. The next day, during his questioning and interview, Tom was taken to a dark room where he was shown the mutilated, scarred body of Marie Smith. Reportedly, Tom placed a hand on Marie and said, "I thank God I can say I didn't do it. I'm sorry for her and her family, but I didn't do it, so help me God." While in police custody, it seems Tom had been beaten and brutalized in order to try to get a confession out of him, but they were never able to get him to confess. So apparently, the next best thing was to try and guilt him into confessing, which didn't work either. His roommate, William Wynn, told detectives that Tom had earlier washed some clothes, and spots on some of his clothes were thought to be blood by the police. Marie was killed the day after election. Tom said that he had been drunk all day during the election. Witnesses were rounded up in order to verify that he had been drinking at a local hotel the morning of Marie's disappearance. Witnesses also verified that he left the hotel and was seen close to the area where Marie was last seen at around 11 o'clock. For his part, Tom notes that after leaving the hotel, he went to the home of Molly Williams, who was the daughter of Delia Jackson's husband. Delia Jackson was the aunt of Marie Smith, married to an African American man. Tom notes that he remained at Molly Williams' house until dusk, after which he went to the boarding house of William Wynn and fell asleep. For his part, Tom notes that after leaving the hotel, he went to the home of Molly Williams, who was the daughter of Delia Jackson's husband. Delia Jackson was the aunt of Marie Smith, married to an African American man. Tom notes that he remained at Molly Williams' house until dusk, after which he went to the boarding house of William Wynn and fell asleep. So the residents of Asbury Park were now satisfied they had someone who had committed this gruesome murder, and they would make him pay. After his arrest, Piper wrote an article and accused Tom Williams of committing the murder. The white population of Asbury Park became incensed at the audacity of a black man killing a white child, and they began to mobilize as they made their way to the jail. Their numbers became bigger and bigger until they formed a huge, boisterous mob. They came across a mason's store, broke in, and stole a sledgehammer, crowbars, and iron rods. Tom, who was in his cell, could hear the thousands of local men and boys shouting, "Shoot him! Lynch him! Let us at him! Mingo Jack!" Mingo Jack was a black man who hanged in 1885 in Eatontown, a city close to Asbury Park. He was accused of mugging a white woman. The sheriff, getting wind of this, called in all his officers and deputized some new ones, including firemen. The rioters were still able to get through the basement door, but they were pushed back by the officers employed by the chief. In order to calm them down, the chief had to assure them that Tom would not be transferred to another jail and justice would be served. However, in the middle of the night, they were able to transfer him to another jail using back roads. He was then placed in the Monmouth County Jail at Freehold. Marie Smith would get justice. It seems her killer was in jail, and the white population of Asbury Park was satisfied that justice will be served. Or will it? Two members of the gentry of Asbury Park, Clarence Heatrick and Randolph Miller, hired a private detective. They began to have doubts about the guilt of Tom Williams. You see, when Tom placed a hand on Marie and said, "I can thank God that I didn't do it," the interviewing officer began to have doubts. So it seems those doubts were communicated to other citizens of Asbury Park. And while it would be nice to have someone arrested for the crime, if the right person was not arrested, that means there would still be a killer amongst them, amongst their own children, wives, and everyone important to them. So, was it justice for Tom Williams why they decided to hire a private detective? Or was it to ensure that they wouldn't have a killer in their midst? Meanwhile, Tom Williams continued to languish in jail. In any event, Raymond Schindler of the Burns Agency was hired. And as you will later see, he had some very unconventional methods of investigation. Schindler initially had 17 suspects, which eventually dwindled down to 6. Max Krishka, as well as 2 workers on his nursery, were likely among the suspects. Max was, however, said to have been in town when the murder was committed, along with his wife. Therefore, his alibi was pretty strong. That left Frank Hendeman, a German immigrant, and another foreign worker. Schindler then decided, in order to get more information, he would need to get on the Krushka property. He did try, even trying to get someone to become an employee there. However, he was not successful. He eventually zeroed in on Frank Heidman, the German immigrant. Frank was a prime suspect simply because he refused to talk and he never left the nursery. As much as the detectives and investigators would try to engage him, he simply ignored them and really only communicated with his boss. There were also 2 witness statements which probably also convinced the detectives to focus on the Krushka property. A classmate notes he left school at the same time as Marie and walked the same path until she made a turnoff. He reached his turnoff soon after and dropped his books off at his house and quickly went back out the door. He looked down the road and saw Marie stop across the street from the Krushka property and then cross the road toward the Krushka sidewalk. Beyond that, he was not able to see her any longer due to woods blocking his view. Another witness recalls seeing Marie cross the road toward Krushka's property and a male voice calling out. She didn't specifically know if he was calling Marie, however. He saw a man standing behind the hedge, whom she was able to later identify as Frank Heidman. An officer later noted that while standing on a bridge in the vicinity of where Marie disappeared, he saw Krishka and Frank Heidman hurrying from the woods. When he shouted out to them, they looked at each other, startled. In response to the police officers' questions about what they were doing there, they noted they were gathering laurels. Max Krishka immediately invited the officer to the house to warm up, and he accepted. 6 hours later, Marie's body was found. Although suspicious, Schindler needed more concrete information to root out the guilty party and put an audacious plan into effect. He suspected that the murderer was on the Krushka property. Without anyone's knowledge, he placed a dictograph in Frank Heidman's room, as he was his prime suspect. This instrument was able to pick up movements and sounds. Schindler reasoned that if Frank committed the murder, he would be guilt-ridden and have a difficult time sleeping. This notion was soon confirmed when Frank was heard pacing up and down his room all hours of the night. However, this still did not get Max to crack and confess to the crime. He then decided to amp up the ruse a bit more. He got another detective from the agency to sneak onto the Krushka property and throw stones near a doghouse, which was close to the cottage where Heidman slept. He reasoned that this action would start the dog howling, which would keep Frank from sleeping and continue to contribute to his mental decline. This was done for approximately 1 hour every night, and Schindler had the detective keep this up night after night. After 10 days of this, Frank could not continue to tolerate the mental strain. He asked his boss, Max Krishka, for a vacation and made his way to New York. It was easy for him to get lost and comfortable in New York, as hundreds of immigrants arrived there daily, some from Germany. Schindler, who was based out of New York, trailed him and continued with his plan. He got permission from the two citizens who were funding the whole investigation. New York was much different from Asbury Park. It was a bustling place where a person can get lost amongst the throngs of people. There were activities there to take a person's mind off anything that was bothering them. There were more people to get to meet and know. Schindler, knowing this, kept close tabs on him and the people he interacted with. After eating at the same German restaurant for weeks, Frank became friendly with a German man close to his age. They would often meet at the restaurant until they became more friendly and began to explore the city together. Eventually, after 3 weeks, they became roommates. Karl, also a young German, parents had died and he was waiting for the estate to be settled, after which he would get an inheritance. So they began going out together. They would go to restaurants, bars, picture shows, and do everyday activities together. They frequently interacted with the many German immigrants in the fast-paced town. As their friendship developed, Frank confided things about himself to Karl, but nothing about his life in Asbury Park. Karl was not so innocent himself, and Frank was able to witness some of his misdeeds. For example, one day he argued with a jewelry store owner and punched him in the face. Karl knew that Frank was holding something back. One night while sleeping, Karl heard Frank muttering some things in his sleep about a little girl, but Frank just muttered an apology and went back to sleep. Next, Karl found a story written in the newspaper about the murder in Asbury Park, and Frank was named as the prime suspect. This shook Frank up, but he still did not confide in Karl. Another incident which aroused Karl's suspicion about Frank happened at a movie theater. They would often go to moving picture shows. One day, while watching a movie about a young woman being assaulted and murdered, Frank unexpectedly walked out of the theater without explanation. For days after, he was anxious and had a lot of sleepless nights. The two decided to take a trip to Yonkers as a way to help Frank clear his mind. Yonkers was outside of the hustle and bustle of the city and was much slower in pace. Once in Yonkers, however, Frank still had not confided in Karl. After a week out of the city, with no mention of the murder, an incident happened which changed the course of Karl's and Frank's friendship. During a drive through Yonkers, they passed a man unknown to them. Karl got out of the carriage in which they were driving and asked the man for a light. The wheels of the carriage touched the man when the horse suddenly startled. The man got upset and started cursing at them and throwing stones. Karl, who by then had driven away in the carriage, turned around, got out of the carriage, went over to the man, and began fighting with him. He finally took out his gun and shot the man 3 times. The next day, Frank read about the murder in the newspaper and realized that it was the same incident which happened to them the day prior. Both men then went to Philadelphia to escape the heat of the city following the murder. During this time, Karl became very nervous and anxious, fearing every moment that the police was onto them. Though he offered Karl words of encouragement and was not judgmental, Frank still did not confide in him about what happened in his past, if anything. It seems as if Karl was used to doing unlawful things, but murder was something that he had never considered he would do and just had a hard time dealing with it. Apart from that, all seemed to be going well, and they decided to move to Atlantic City with Schindler right on their tail. A dictograph was placed in their room to record any information which may be useful to the case in Asbury Park. While there, it seems that Karl's parents' estate had finally been settled, and according to a letter he received, a room on a steamship as well as a ticket to Germany was provided for him. Karl never told Frank about this new occurrence, but while he was out of their shared room, it was discovered by Frank. Frank became incensed with the idea of Carl moving on. Carl had apparently been covering their expenses since they became friends. It seems the idea of him leaving reminded Frank that without him, he was destitute. He had no money. Frank accused him of trying to leave him behind and go to Germany. Carl initially denied it, but finally confessed that he decided to move on because he didn't know if and when Frank would turn on him and let the police know about the murder that he'd committed. Frank then knew he had to do something to gain the full confidence of his friend and finally confessed to the murder. With everything on the table, Carl told Frank that he would take him to Germany with him. The next day, they took the train on their way to go to the boat which would take them to Germany. They had to travel through Monmouth County where the murder had taken place. The train stopped in Red Bank, and a detective approached Frank and told him he was under arrest. Against the protest of Frank and Carl, Frank was taken off the train in Red Bank and taken right to jail. He was interrogated for over 10 hours. During that time, he did not confess to the murder and denied everything. So even though they had a lot of evidence against Frank, Schindler thought they were all circumstantial and he needed to get a full confession from him. Carl came to see him the next day and told him what the papers were saying about the manner in which he committed the murder. Frank denied the papers' account and went on to explain how exactly the assault and murder took place. Unknown to him, a dictograph was placed in the room to record everything that he said, and his statement was later transcribed by a stenographer. Schindler then came to him with a shocker. It was revealed that Carl was not who he claimed to be. He was a detective also working with the Burns agency, and everything that he told Frank had been a lie to gain his trust. Everything had been set up to get Frank to confess. The incident with the jewelry store owner, the movie at the theater was played exclusively for him after being set up by Schindler with the cooperation of the movie theater owner. The newspaper articles were all printed in limited amounts at the request of Schindler. And most shocking of all, the murder committed by Carl was staged. The bullets had been blank. Once Frank was aware of his situation and how he was duped, he admitted to the murder and confessed what actually took place. Frank said he was standing at the entrance to the Krushka driveway when Marie came along that Wednesday and a sudden desire came over him to possess her. He called to Marie and asked her if she didn't want some flowers to take home to her mother. Marie without hesitation agreed and took his hand and walked to the woods with him. There, he assaulted her. Fearing that she would tell her parents, he used a hammer and bashed her head in and further brutalized her body. Frank was then put on trial for the murder of Marie Smith. The trial was concluded in 4 days, with him being found guilty of the crime and sentenced to death. He was executed May 23, 1911. According to reports, he said that his only last wish was for a sharp knife and Carl's throat to be close by. Other reports says that he forgave Carl and wrote letters to his parents in Germany. It is said that Marie's parents never got over the murder and would grieve for her the rest of their lives. The lives of the rest of Asbury Park was also forever changed with this incident. So it seems that Marie Smith eventually did get justice. Some continued to question if the right man was executed for the crime. Did Frank Heidman have an accomplice, namely Max Krushka? Did he take the rap for him? Did the people of Asbury Park still have a killer living amongst them? For Tom Williams, it seems that justice was not to be his portion. Though the NAACP, who was still in its infancy, fought for him to be released, he was still charged with illegal voting under an assumed name and given 2 years in prison. After being released, Tom Williams and all traces of him disappeared. Thank you for watching this video about Marie Smith. Feel free to leave any questions or comments letting me know what you think of the video, or if you know anything about the people in the video, especially Tom Williams. See you in the next one.